Hi, and welcome back to the HE Enable podcast. This is usually the show where we share lived experiences of disability, neurodivergence, and long-term health conditions in UK higher education. However, we are doing something a little bit different this week. So the annual Disabled Student Survey 2025 was released by Disabled Students UK in collaboration with and funded by the Snowdon Trust. I have been invited by Disabled Students UK to have a chat about this report, what it means for disabled students, and what we can expect from institutions going forward. This is sponsored by Disabled Students UK, which I am incredibly grateful for. I will note they are not telling me what I need to say. We will have an open discussion, and by we, I mean Murrin is back. Hello, Murrin.
Hello, it's lovely to be back.
It is. So you are obviously on staff for Disabled Students UK, which means that I have the pleasure of chatting to you again.
Yes.
Yes.
So to introduce myself from a DSUK lens, I am the Operations and Inclusions Director for DSUK. And although I didn't have much input into the report writing itself, our team has been working away at it very hard for the last few months. So it's been great to see it come into fruition.
Absolutely. So the report released on Thursday, the 29th of January, so yesterday, as we're recording this. We're throwing this together quite quickly, in tandem with a panel with 4 specialists from across the sector. And we wanted to read the report, see what they had to say, and come together with our thoughts. It's a bit of a tricky one, because obviously we want to talk to students today. This report isn't aimed at students, it's aimed at institutions. But we also don't want to leave students out. And I think it's important that we take a look at it. We'll discuss some findings, but we'll also look at some practical advice and what you can do, which for the most part is going to be nothing. Like, institutions need to be doing more, but we'll give you some practical advice on where to look, where you might want to escalate issues to, because for many reasons, we feel like it's important to point that out, which we'll get to. And then we will just have a look at what the report's about. How's that sound, Murrin?
Yeah, no, that sounds great. I think, although it's not aimed at students, we hope that as many higher education institutions will read this report as there are in the UK. But I think I know myself, my own experience, when I was a disabled student, I was always interested in what was going on across the sector. So we hope this might be to some use of you, as well as giving you some resources where you can seek support, but also maybe to encourage your higher education institution to read the report as well, because that's what we want, is we want them to read this and make change. But yeah, hopefully you all find it interesting, although it's a bit different from Cath's usual. But yeah, thank you so much for agreeing to do the episode as well.
Oh, absolutely. I am an ex-students' union nerd. This is the kind of stuff that I used to have to dig my teeth into for meetings anyway. I never thought I'd be paid to do it, so I'll take it as a win. What we're going to do, so this report's broken into 6 parts, which are universal design, inclusive culture, a barrier-free path to support, sufficient adjustments, somewhere to turn, and equal opportunities. And we have feedback from students in all 6 categories. We are hopefully not just going to talk through a bunch of boring statistics. We'll use some shreds of our own lived experience of people I've interviewed, of observations that we've seen, because, I have ADHD, let alone some of the potential listeners. If I talk about statistics for an hour, I will go mad. So I think it's good that we do that. But without further ado, Murrin, is there anything else you want to say to introduce the report, or should we just jump into section 1?
Yeah, I think let's just jump right into it. But also, I'm sure with the episode release, we will link where you can see the report for yourself. And also, we did record the panel session yesterday. I'm hoping that we're going to be able to share that on social media as well, so that anyone who missed it but is interested can rewatch, as it was a really great discussion that we had during the panel. So yeah, that is everything. And just a big shout out to all my colleagues who spent a long time on this report and made it what it is. And it's a really interesting read. And even if you don't want to get your teeth stuck into every little part. I hope that we can give a good kind of summary of each section and, yeah, like you say, bring in some lived experience and how these things seem to be in everyday life for disabled students. So, yeah, let's get into it.
And I want to say one more thing. So one thing that we were chatting about before we started recording was, and I completely forgot to mention this, was the representation of this survey, which I think is very important to know going in. So if I just pick the most common category from each demographic question, we can make a pretty safe assumption that the majority of these respondents are white female undergraduates.
Yeah.
And one thing that we want you, if you have the energy to do anything after this episode, if you don't have the energy to campaign for change or you don't want to, we're not going to ask you to do anything like that. But if you know of anyone, especially, male, global majority backgrounds, postgraduate, taught or research students, get them to sign up to be notified when the survey opens, which I think there is a link. I will link it in this episode, because the more we can represent all disabled students, the better this will be for everyone, not just as a representation tool, but as a resource for universities, especially picking up in that intersectionality.
100%, yeah, and fully agree with that. We definitely want to get a more diverse pool of students who, where it represents the full student population and not just some. So, yes, no pressure after the episode to do any action like Cath says, but if you would like to, you can sign up and you will be notified when it'll be the annual Disabled Students Survey 2026 will be live. Please do that if you are able, but again, no pressure. We understand the difficulties.
We've done enough stalling, Murrin. Do you want to introduce section 1, please? Universal design.
Yeah, so our universal design section, basically the principle of this is looking at how disabled students should be greeted. So we believe that disabled students should be greeted by an environment, policies, practices, and culture as well that is designed with accessibility in mind. So universal design has actually been quite a widespread topic. In my studies, I was part of a working group, I suppose is the word, towards creating universal design specifically for neurodivergent students. But I don't know about everyone else, but I would love to see, I'd love to see the neurodivergent spread of universal design, but I would love to see it also aimed at other disabilities and chronic illness and so on as well. So this section of the report talks about universal design and has questions around how people feel is accessibility basically designed into the system, into the institution. So that's what this section focuses on.
Absolutely. And the start of it is what I think are quite standard adjustments. So do you think that your lectures are accessible? Do you receive everything that you need? Have they been recorded? Are they accessible? Have they been recorded? Is there captioning? So if I pull up a question, for example, what proportion of your lectures in the last year have been recorded? We have goals in each column for 2033 and where we want to be. And I think it's important we use this as a benchmark. So the benchmark's 80%. 61% of lectures have been recorded. And speaking frankly, I think that for the most part, we are kind of universally away from our goals by some margins, not because of any malice, but because institutional systems are struggling and there's funding cuts and things like that. But also, what do you think on overall access to in-person teaching at the moment?
Yeah, so it's an interesting statistic. I just wanted to pick back up on that as well specifically with the percent, what proportion of lectures have been recorded. The fact that the numbers have been going down each year as well. I mean, this is, I say going down. It was 62% in 2023 and then 63% in 2024. And then we've jumped back to 61%.
Stable in the wrong direction.
Yeah, exactly. But it's clear that is as we've been moving further away from the COVID pandemic and as things have been moving on from that, I think that universities have felt less pressure to record their lectures, which in itself is super frustrating because I know how beneficial it is to have lectures recorded. Because even if you're learning in person, inherently physical barriers to actually accessing campus and institutions is very, like, it's a big problem. It's a widespread problem across higher education. So to add that into it, it's difficult getting on site to your institution because of the physical barriers. And then on top of that, you can't re-watch things back or re-listen to things or access them. You know, I've been a big topic of conversation. I'm sorry, my thoughts are jumping all over the place because there's so many things popping into my head right now.
No, absolutely.
A big topic of conversation recently that I've been involved in as well is we've been calling on a big need for redesign of like the transport systems across the UK that are inherently inaccessible as well. It's particularly trains, and the fact that if you are a wheelchair user, you have to rely most of the time on external staff that are not on the train to get a ramp and let you off. Now, if you're going to class and that member of staff does not turn up to the platform on time to let you off the train with the ramp, and then the lecture isn't recorded, you're completely at a disadvantage. So for me, it's something I'm really passionate about, where lectures should be recorded. I'm sure most of you have had the adjustment to like record lectures when you're there in person, like maybe DSA, Disabled Students Allowance, will give you a recording device and you can record them when you're there in person. And I think that's the argument that a lot of lecturers will use is you can record it yourself if you're here, if you're present, but it just completely ignores all the barriers that are in place for people to actually get there in person. So, yeah.
Specifically on lecture capture, I've sat at both sides of this debate, actually. So I've attended one university which has a default opt-in policy for lecture recordings, where a lecturer has to opt out, basically for a specific module. I don't want this to be recorded. Otherwise, it auto-records by default in most of the lecture theatres. But in Oxford's an opt-in institution. So you have to opt in for lecture capture. And it's a very interesting discussion. I don't think it's one I necessarily agree with but it gets into like very foggy territory with intellectual property rights, what happens if it's shared outside, which are all valid points, but as I recorded my lectures, I will say the one thing that I found genuinely confusing is aligning my slides with where the lecture is, because I only have an audio recording. Typically, you don't get video software. Trying to like align those is nigh on impossible. But thinking about what you were saying for the rest of the questions in this section, which are also, accessible captions, of everything being accessible, even online platforms like Panopto, Moodle, all that being accessible to use. We're seeing an influx of people agreeing that it's becoming more accessible. Maybe that's because of the different measures that Disabled Students UK is using this year. But also, pretty universally we're seeing a decline. Even if some of it is improving, it's being counterweighted as well.
Yeah. Like, I wonder if part of like online platforms and so on, like I guess the digital accessibility of things, like I wonder if part of the reason that it's becoming more easier to navigate is the fact that a lot of universities, I mean, in my own social circle, I know that some universities this year, and of course I'm in Scotland, so I don't know, maybe we're a bit different of here, but some universities were taking on a lot of like student feedback on how, even for non-disabled students, how confusing it was to navigate platforms such as Moodle and Blackboard and Panopto. I've never said that word out loud before. Yeah, I've used it. I've just never had to actually say it out loud. So part of me wonders if universities are listening to that, or if it's just the change of these platforms becoming more easier to use, if that makes sense. But if anyone's used them, you'll know they're not intuitive to use, and a lot of the time you need like a full breakdown on how to use them for it to make sense. So yeah, for me, it's a frustrating issue. But we are looking at the stats as well, specifically to the module platforms. We're only 5% away from our 2033 goal of 75%. So it's positive in some ways, but I do think there's still a lot of work to be done there.
Another part of this section focuses on assessment. And this is where I think the statistics kind of start to suck a little bit, unfortunately. So we will find that even if universities are starting to get better with lecture capture and get better with what they're doing, even if it's incrementally, in terms of the classroom activities, the assessment section of this bit tells a completely different story. So, 46% of people feel like they've received a lower mark on a course because an assessment wasn't accessible. The goal is to have that under 15%. 55% of people think that the style of an assessment doesn't allow them to demonstrate their knowledge or skill effectively. And this can be looking at big attainment gaps. I know that there was a recent report that said disabled students' attainment is up, but it's coming at the cost of well-being and everything else. Do you think that the statistics here reflect that quite well? Because I'm quite worried about the assessment section of this, to be honest.
Yeah, for sure. And it's disheartening to see that these stats are just how they are, I guess. Like they're disheartening to look at, they're disheartening to read. And I think that they're also spot on in terms of the way that assessment is inherently not accessible, and a lot of the times universities don't have alternative assessment options. I was really fortunate with my institution that for some of my assessments, for a couple of them, the head of the department sat down with me and we kind of designed it together of how I would need it to be. And I know that experience is very unique, because across my networks and my social circles, I know that that's not the case. But also here in these stats, it's very clear across the UK. It's not the case that every institution will do that, will have the time, make the time, or think of alternatives before it's needed. Because again, the mental cost and the energy of having to advocate for what you need and what you think will work and what you're thinking they will accept. Yeah, it's very draining, and it definitely does come with a well-being cost. To try and perform to the best of your ability is really difficult. And I know for myself, I definitely resigned myself to the fact that I would just have to scrape past with passes for every course because of how mentally exhausting and physically exhausting the whole experience was. So yeah, it's dire.
It can go as well from everything from this isn't an accessible format for me to I had Ollie and Amelia on the show where basically Ollie had to sit there with Amelia and break down what her questions meant so she understood what they meant coming into assessment, because she's autistic, she was taking it so literally. That was a big struggle. Lewis's episode is now on Patreon, I realised. It's not on Spotify at the moment, but his episode, he was talking about very vague briefs for his projects as well. So it's not necessarily just the format, it's the wording. But the one thing that this section also introduces that we find as a theme throughout this report is a lot of students don't know where to turn.
Yes.
Which is why, we want to hopefully provide some advice with that. Because there was a question, if you're unable to take an exam at the intended time due to being unwell, are you generally allowed to take it at a later time without the results being capped? And only 32% of people said yes. If we take away the yes, 46% of people did not know. That's almost half.
Yeah.
And it's the same story as we go further into this report as well. I'll just ask this more as a general question because we have a lot of uncertainty here from students. What do you think we should do for signposting? Because it's such a big theme through this paper.
Yeah, it is a big theme. And I think in my own experience as well, when I was the EDI officer for my student union, it was something that a lot of people approached me with. They just have no idea where to go. And I think the problem is that I think when you join university, when you start university, it's so overwhelming. You're given a lot of information. Everything's very information heavy. And obviously within that, there's some resources. But I think specifically for disabled students who are just trying to do the minimum to just turn up on the day and to their first class, without these resources being explicitly clear that this is what you need to do if you're a disabled student, or this is where you need to go if you're a disabled student to access these additional supports if you face these barriers. It's like a minefield. You don't know where to go. And I think student unions deal with that a lot as well, where they have to answer for the university as to like, where do you go to get the support, what support is available. And I think that it really could just be solved with more efficient signposting from universities, and probably, to be honest, just like specific welcome packs that have sections on support for students with additional support needs. Maybe that would solve it, maybe it wouldn't. Again, it's more taxing, it's more energy to go through that, to read those things and look for those things. But it's a big problem, and higher education institutions really need to look at how they can improve that, because it's needed badly.
I just want to rapid fire a few other statistics from this. So 45% of respondents felt unable to attend an in-person teaching session because the location was not physically or sensorially accessible. Only 80% are confident that they could get out of all the campus buildings that they use in an emergency, which sounds not great in terms of like the law.
Yeah.
Frankly.
Yeah.
And the question that really bugs me is about student housing. So 64% of people have student housing that meets their access needs. But the thing that surprised me more is, of those who had it, 47% had to pay more housing to meet their access needs. And I didn't realize this was a problem until I started this show. Because when I got to uni, I required an ensuite. But I was like, this is a reasonable adjustment. You know, mm-hmm. I need this. I can't take shared bathroom. Can you adjust my price? And both of my universities said yes. But it shouldn't have to take me asking. I felt like I was cheating the system. Yeah. Right? I felt like I was being cheeky. That kind of screams to me that that's not happening. And it's one of those things that you only get if you ask, which is alarming. And it's not very proactive at all. And it's costing students money in a cost of living crisis.
Exactly. And again, it adds to that mental burden of further administration. Because I'm assuming that along with having to ask for it, there's probably then, again, more medical proof, more written evidence and things like that has to be submitted in some of these cases. And yeah, so it's more money, it's more administrative burden, it's more time, it's so many more just barriers that people need to contend with when trying to find suitable housing, specifically for studies, which already out with academia, out with studying, is a huge issue as well. So when you leave university, it's a problem. So it's frustrating, never-ending cycle, it seems.
And that touches all areas of student life, which we've spoken about and we'll touch on a bit later on. The last bit of this section is about policy. And as with universal design, the physical environment, progress in institutional policy, the report says has been limited over the past 3 years. And there's only a couple questions, but I think they're incredibly important. So for those who have an attendance requirement for their course, only 43% said that if they couldn't attend a lecture due to disability reasons, that's counted towards their average. If you have a long-term health condition, it's particularly brutal because you might have to force yourself in on a bad day, especially if it counts towards your final mark. That can be incredibly damaging. And like, again, I want to reference Lewis's episode, but it's not out yet. But you know, he had a really great example of he just couldn't make it out to go and do a lot of his practicals. And it's the one that immediately springs to mind because it's the one I've recorded most recently. But I'm sure if you look back in the 30 episodes I made, I'm sure there'll be another example.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's a huge issue. And I remember being in, so I did a HNC, which is like equivalent to first year of uni. And when I did that, one of my lecturers was so passionate about everyone's attendance. And she would often, at the beginning of lectures, like do this like threat of, if you don't attend these classes, it's going to affect your grade. And that used to put me in such a horrible way, because I was like, I am so unwell that I can't attend every lecture. And then what if my grades are affected? And yeah, it ended up in this whole thing. And eventually I complained about it, and turns out that the college couldn't actually do that, but this lecturer took it upon herself to make that a thing that she would say at the start of class, because for disability reasons, I was exempt from that. And there was probably other people in my class that were exempt from that as well. But it was just, yeah, you feel the pressure. Even if you know you're exempt, the pressure is there.
I had a lecturer who I stopped attending his classes because, you know, we personally didn't get along, that's whatever. But I heard afterwards that he was basically not allowing people to bring laptops into lectures. Nothing was recorded. And I got the department to ask him to send a clarification email, because he's like, if you don't submit this homework, you fail, which was physically impossible for the nature of the module. He's a DEI lead.
That's horrifying.
Yeah, I won't say where. But, you know, 9% of people face disciplinary action as a result of disability due to attendance. 39% of people, which is the majority here, don't know whether they'd be allowed to complete the course part-time. It's so much signposting, Murrin. I'm sure you have stuff to say on that, but I want to have a look at question 2. I think that now we've kind of rambled our way through establishing what this paper's about, we'll be able to be a little more concise, hopefully. And let's give people, you know, now we've got through the initial bit, let's have a chat about inclusive culture. So the principle here in the report is that disabled students should experience a positive culture at their institution, which promotes inclusion, belonging, and a healthy approach to productivity. What do you think about the principle here? Do you have any extra thoughts on it?
So I think what is interesting about this section of the report is that overall, it seems that things have improved in this area, which I think is one of the more positive parts of the report. But I guess it's also asking why. And I suppose as well, just because it's on average improved, it doesn't mean that it's consistent as well.
So one feature of this, if people go on to read the paper and end up looking at this section, there are just big tables of quotes, essentially, of has this been said to you? And one of them is very positive, like, it's okay to need support, which 69% of respondents said they heard. Mental health problems are valid, 55%. Not all disability is visible, and it goes down like that. And then you flip to the next page, and it goes to all the negative stuff, which might have been stated and implied, which some of these were higher than I thought. Yeah. Adjustments won't work in the real world, 25%. Accessibility needs are a nuisance or unreasonable. If you are so disabled, you should interrupt your studies, got 17%. And yeah, I don't want to come into this report as like Little Miss Doom and Gloom. That's not what I want to do here. But, you know, we're dealing with quite tricky statistics. I'm very glad that the awareness is coming from like members of staff. The highest responses we're seeing here are the positive ones.
Yeah.
But we've still got a quarter of people. There's going to be at least a couple hundred of respondents hearing these negative ones. What do you think about what that means for, I guess, the overall culture in higher education right now, especially amongst staff?
Yeah, we can't shy away from the negatives. And I think, like, unfortunately, that is part of this paper, is there's a lot of them. And I think, like I say, even in areas where some things have improved, the statistics are still so awful to read that it's like, fills me with a lot of frustration and upset that I always know it's not going to be a quick fix, but sometimes I wish that it was, as I'm sure we all do. But yeah, I think read especially the question around the quotes, like the negative quotes, I guess, that people have heard. It rings so true to my personal experience as well. Like, it's almost as if I could have written these myself. And I think that's what's so hurtful looking at these. It really for me, sums up how disability is treated in the higher education sector, unfortunately.
Absolutely, but as you said, there's some really positive trends coming through. So later in the section, 57% of people agree the majority of their educators sufficiently prioritise my well-being. Over half. The goal is 65%. We were at 57% for 2033, which is a decent way away. Obviously, we want to surpass these goals.
Yes, yeah.
Because that would mean that more people are getting a good experience, but we're on our way to that.
Yeah.
The majority of educators are understanding when my disability impacts my performance is 58. Again, that goal is 65. It always hurts because it feels like you're ignoring a quarter of respondents when you're being like, yeah, this is going great. And there's like hundreds of people like, oh, maybe not.
Yeah.
But we also have to celebrate the wins. I think if we sat here for an hour and just acted, we were just like, this is incredibly depressing, which, is a big response in the sector right now, especially in the DEI bit of higher education.
Yeah.
We need some kind of silver lining at this point.
Definitely.
Yeah, like 74% of people haven't encountered teaching that devalues disabled people or is built on like ableist stereotypes. Amazing. Then it gets to this question. I'm sure you know the one I'm about to say. Has a staff member at the institution ever treated the adjustments that have been agreed for you as mere suggestions? 41% said yes. What do we think about that, mate?
Yeah, it's too much. It's too high. I think, in my own experience as well, it does echo a lot of, unfortunately, lecturers' attitudes towards some of the adjustments that have been put in place. And I think everyone probably can relate to being questioned on them and being like, wow, I didn't think I had to do that. I thought it was just something that was nice to do. And I think that's the problem, is that seems to be an ongoing attitude across higher education, is that a lot of people feel that adjustments are things that are nice to have rather than necessities for people to learn.
And also like legal requirements here. I don't think a lot of people know that this is a legal requirement. And one thing that it was Jim Dickinson from Wonky said at the panel yesterday that I really took to heart was that of course it is going to be if all their training is optional for disability. Like the vast majority of unis don't have compulsory disability training. If they are, they're well ahead, as you'll see in reports like Bath Spa and London South Bank University, who we see as, and I think Kent did quite well as well in setting very good precedents. Mm-hmm. For the most part, this training doesn't exist. So we're running out of time. I'm acutely aware. We've ad-libbed a little too close to the sun. We're going to be a bit more concise from now on, but the last thing I want to touch on in section 2 is I feel my funding body is flexible, accommodating, and values my well-being. I'm going to assume that this is a good chunk of either international undergraduates or postgraduate students. Only 36% believe that their funding body is flexible. If you work for something like the UKRI or a funding body, maybe consider what you can do for your disabled students. But we want to swiftly move on because we're having a little too much fun here. Murrin, what is section 3 about, lovely?
Yeah, so section 3 is called A Barrier-Free Path to Individualised Support. So overall, this is kind of looking at disabled support services, so disability services for students, which overall, students definitely value the services that disability services can provide. Mostly there's positives and they're positively rated, and that is good to see. But also the most interesting part of this section, I would say, is that fewer students are getting formal support plans, which is interesting. And I wonder if we should have a bit of a discussion on why we think that could be.
I mean, it could be anything, really. I think there's a few different components. I'm sure if we look somewhere, these will be backed up. Off the top of my head, I would say it could be an increase in informal support, which, given a lot of the conversation yesterday was about how we have proactive measures to accommodate for students, I'm not sure whether that's where I'm leaning right now, but it could be happening. Another reason could be that students feel like they need a formal diagnosis to access reasonable adjustments, which per the Equality Act they don't. It could be cultural differences where they don't know what constitutes a disability, but if they can have something, they'll take it. But they don't know whether a full support plan is for them. Or also, people might not feel like they need it, and that's not up to us. And obviously they're allowed to do their own stuff, and I think it's probably a balance of those.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I think definitely at the beginning of this report and the executive summary as well, it does mention that it does seem like the obvious point would be that there's maybe more informal support in place, which is where students are going to, like you mentioned. But I just found that to be one of the kind of more interesting points on this, and whether that's a positive or not as well. So yeah, it's definitely thought-provoking.
Yeah, I mean, also, if we look at it, 39% of people didn't know they were disabled or had disability at the start of their course. Or 38% of people, as per the usual theme in this paper, didn't know who to talk to. And requesting support is one of those things where we look at it and we're like, people really don't know where to look to get support. Support is always the big one with questions like these, where people are just lost and they don't know where to look to get the support, and they might not have the energy to go digging.
Yeah, it's an overall theme across the board. So yeah, shall we look at the next section?
Yeah, so sufficient adjustments. This section, the principle is that disabled students should receive all reasonable adjustments needed to enable them to access their degree on equal terms with non-disabled peers. Is that the case, Murrin? Break it to me gently.
So the first question is, I have all the support and adjustments I need to be able to access my studies on equal terms with my non-disabled peers. 52% agree. So there has been an increase in that. So that is a positive, definitely. However, overall, it's not a great read again, unfortunately.
No, we feel like such a downer, but we're just reading the data.
Yeah, it's like as I go down, I'm like, oh. Yeah, so fewer than half of students say that all their agreed adjustments are consistently delivered, which is not surprising, but disappointing, I suppose, is the way to word that, I guess.
And on top of that, 64% of students said that they weren't even going to bother chasing it because they didn't have the energy. Which is just, I mean, it's not on the student, that's the thing. This shouldn't be how it is, but we don't have that accountability for them to be like, hey, this is wrong, this isn't helping me. I need, there's no fail checks. The fail check is a student complaining, but if they don't have the energy, there's no accountability right now.
Yeah, it's the frustrating thing again and again that the responsibility all falls down onto disabled students, and it shouldn't. But if we don't hold them to account, who does? So this is the very frustrating thing, yeah.
If a student was denied adjustment, the reasons, it's not something we provide, it wouldn't be fair to other students, and it's a requirement for the course that you complete this task without an adjustment at the top 3. And I think that comes with a lot of conflating reasonable adjustments for competency standards, which is frustrating.
Definitely frustrating.
Yeah. Half of people think that the only adjustment an institution offered wasn't enough to put them at the same level as their non-disabled peers, and only 44% of people had the adjustments that were agreed by their institution fully provided. Like, if, for example, you're a student in the situation where you're struggling with your support, what do you think that, they should be doing? Not as like I'm going to go and campaign, but like, where do you think they should look to start digging themselves out of what might be a big support pit? There's students' unions, which provide a lot of support. Departmental well-being. Do you have anything else potentially?
Yeah, I was going to say what jumps to mind for me first is student unions and seeking advice there. There are barriers there as well, but they can be really helpful in knowing the legalities and your rights as a disabled student. And also, yeah, well-being services at universities is a different story, but they can be supportive as well. I suppose they're kind of your first two. And as DSUK, we don't provide individualised student support, unfortunately. We would love to be able to, but we are such a small team that we are unable to. However, we have our social spaces, like there's a couple of Facebook groups and things. We're now using a new platform called Circle as well, where you join the group and speak to peers that are going through the same thing. And we also have community spaces that we host every month as well, where we talk on different subjects. But it's always good. I think it's always a great environment to meet other disabled students going through the same things. And although that is exhausting in itself, that we're all having to go through these things, it is lovely to be able to know you're not on your own in the struggle as well. So I suppose just to plug our resources there, if we can support in some way to kind of help with the burden of feeling alone in it, then that's positive as well.
Yep, and the Snowdon Trust, who funded this paper, provides monetary support, especially for mobility grants. I believe they just closed for this year, but I believe those are open pretty frequently. I just want to plug that. I'm not going to linger on it. Not that I don't love the Snowdon Trust, they do amazing work, but we're talking about SUs, we're talking about DSUK. Section 5 is all about having somewhere to turn.
Yes, exactly. So good little,
it's a good
little tangent. Yeah.
The principle here: disabled students should have a personal place to go to within their institution to effectively resolve accessibility issues. This is exactly what it says on the tin. You need to have somewhere to go, whether it's trusted lecturer, member of staff, you go to your SU. It's making sure that people have somewhere safe to turn, but also they know where they can go if they need it. For the most part, it's pretty good, to be fair. So 69% of people say as a personal system within the institution that they feel like they can turn to, and like just under half of respondents say that when they've been struggling, someone at the institution's recognised that proactively and they've put in scaffolds for them there.
Which we would love to be much higher, definitely, because I think that's part of it. Is sometimes we need other people to realise we're struggling. We don't always know how much we're struggling ourselves, and sometimes it takes that external person to say, can I help you? You're not actively reaching out for that help as well. So I think, yeah, that is something that really needs to be improved on.
Yeah, and I think we always forget that things take a village, but we're in such a hyper-individualised society that we try and shoulder the burden ourselves, especially because as disabled students, we usually, rightly, to be fair, have a big distrust in the system. But also, is it going to fix itself if we don't use it? It's a balance, right?
Yeah, it's catch-22.
It is a catch-22. 48% of people who didn't raise an accessibility issue, they didn't raise it because it would take too much time or effort to advocate for themselves. And I think that's so telling of so many issues. Like, they might have nowhere to turn, there might not be any resources for them, potentially, depending on the institution. And that is, some of them just don't have faith their institution is going to fix the issue, which is the next response.
Yeah, and I think overall, thinking about it is where you're going through a degree, your main focus should be on obtaining this degree, working as hard as you want to, and not thinking about, the extra burden it's going to take to advocate for an accessibility need that should have been provided in the first place. So how do we change this? And I think one of the things that before the episode started recording, we talked about the wall of listen, and I guess that's where this angst in me comes from, is like, how do we get these institutions to listen when a lot of the times there's a lot of student activists, there's a lot of student campaigners that are approaching their institutions and saying what needs to change, and they're not listening to it. So like, how can we expect things to get different? And I wish someone had the answer. But unfortunately, it's the institutions need to be proactive themselves in realising that they need to seek support and listen to their students, and how to fix and change these barriers, for sure.
And moving on from that, one of the things that's at the end of the section is, it's not just having someone to turn to, it's having it work effectively. 40% of people feel like they're pushing one person the next because it's unclear who's responsible for their access. And it really brings you back to another DSUK person, Sophie, who was on the show a while ago, and they were saying that getting the lift fixed in the library and making sure everything was wheelchair accessible for them across like the big bridge in York to get from the main campus to the library how they were essentially pushed between teams. I think that eventually estates got sick of them and just didn't reply as much. And it's that kind of thing, right? Where no one knows. And even if one group does take responsibility, the actual execution might be in another group's hands, and then that person, the first person, kind of leaves the picture. There's no necessarily true hierarchy of accountability for accessibility in most institutions.
Yeah, which is such a big problem, because how can we expect students to know where to go when a lot of the time the institutions don't know where to go and don't know where to turn? So it's a big problem constantly getting pushed between teams and departments. And yeah, Sophie's experience rings true, I think, for a lot of people as well, frustratingly.
And again, I think we'll need to link some resources in the description of this episode. We have some statistics. 71% of people don't know how to go about making a formal disability-related complaint at their institution. That is a bit of a dire statistic, unfortunately.
Yeah, it really is, yeah.
So the comments on this episode, at least on Spotify, should be open. If anyone has any practical tips and tricks, definitely throw them in. You know, we're trying to fit in as much as we can in an already overrunning episode, but we will put some resources in the description, especially from Disabled Students UK, so you'll know where to look. And there's always going to be contacts. If not your supervisor, find the DEI person. If you're really struggling, go to your students' union. They will do their best to at least signpost you to where you need to go.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I think, at least with student unions, they will signpost you. If that's the least they can do, it's still something, I suppose. But we will also be sure to do some like social media comms after this and try and plug some further resources as well.
Absolutely. And if all else fails, Disabled Students UK has an online community space every month where they discuss different topics. There's always places to go, but sometimes if you don't know about them, like, you don't know, right? And it feeds quite well into section 6, where, final section, equal opportunities. Disabled students should be provided with the same non-academic opportunities in their institution as their non-disabled peers. Do you want to say a quick word about this section?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, because I think in my own experience, it just rings true that I did not feel that way. And that's anywhere from societies and things like that not being accessible, or not even having anything on accessibility and not being sure if they were going to be accessible or not. And again, having to go out your way, do that extra administrative burden to find out if they were going to be accessible, and so on and so forth. But also just non-academic events that institutions host. I think there's emphasis on that as well, as to whether they feel inherently accessible or not. And looking at the first question is what kind of stands out to me is, I feel part of a community at this institution. 50% agree. And I think 50%, I mean, it's better than it was in 2023. However, it's still heartbreaking that only half of disabled students feel part of the community at this institution, but I know personally that is very true to my experience.
I want to give a bit of a jaded shout out to Oxbridge for this section. I was looking, there's a short list of university rankings at the end, and you'd look at which universities appear to be meeting their 2033 goals. And Oxford, Cambridge, I love you, they ranked quite low in most of the rankings.
Mm-hmm.
However, I don't know if it's the collegiate system, I don't know whether it's smaller classes, tutorials, anything like that, and I guess a smaller teacher-to-student ratio. But if you look at the community side of things, only for that section, the two of the top universities there. And it's really interesting how, despite everything in what are two very decentralized universities in terms of governance, maybe it's compulsory living in college in first year, which is usually highly encouraged. There's something that appears to be there that's working.
Yeah, they're doing something right, and I think that's where we need to, other higher education institutions need to look at them as examples for what they're doing for their students, that makes people, including disabled people, feel part of a community, feel part of their university. I think it should be at the heart of the student experience as well, but it's often missed out for disabled students, which, yeah, again, doom and gloom. Yes, it's hard not to look at the negatives. And I suppose looking at this section, when I'm trying to look at the positives, I suppose one is I feel satisfied with my institution. 61% this year agree with that, which is quite significant rises from the previous two reports. And it's interesting because I would love to know exactly like what it is that has made people feel more satisfied, but it shows a positive trend in the shift.
There's also been an albeit small reduction in people considering interrupting their studies or leaving their institution. Leaving is currently at 41%, which still sits, in a very big minority, but it's down from 43%, unfortunately up from 2024, which is 37%, but overall there seems to be, at least for now, some kind of slightly unsteady but downward trend, and hopefully we can continue to lower that, because we've had 1 in 5 had to change course, interrupt their studies, or switch to part-time because of inaccessibility, and we need to nip that in the bud. The last bit that I want to touch on, actually two very small bits. First of all, only 45% of people feel like extracurriculars are accessible to them. Just want to raise a couple notes on that. One thing that wasn't captured, which we were talking about before this, the proportion of commuting students in this sample. We don't know whether disabled students' lack of engaging with extracurriculars is because of that.
Yeah.
It's because we have more commuting disabled students that we don't know about because of how the sample was collected, or whether it's because they're exhausted from lack of support. We don't know the underlying causes, or whether it's the activities themselves. We don't know the underlying causes for why extracurriculars are inaccessible. And I think that when we look at that statistic, just taking it with a bit of a pinch of salt, I'd say, just because we don't know what the underlying cause is, it's probably, we're assuming it's related to disability. It could be, it could not be.
Yeah.
But I hope that next year there's some extra questions on that one.
Yeah, for sure, because it's a really interesting point that you make about that. And I think we can't make too many assumptions about the reasons for those.
Last one. This one I think is a really interesting one. I'd love to get your thoughts. Real spread on this question. I feel represented by my students' union. 37% agree, 30% disagree, 33% neither. I think that is the most clean split question in this entire survey.
Yeah, definitely. And it is an increase, at least. It's an increase in stats from the last 2 years as well. And I think, to be honest, I think a lot of it comes from, again, that just universities seem to be not very good at signposting and so on. And I think that it comes back to that, is that with neither, I mean, for personally, I didn't even engage with my student union until my 3rd year because I didn't really know what it was or what they did or things like that. So I think it comes from a lack of information as well as maybe people just not knowing they can actually go to their student union for certain areas of advice.
Yeah, and they just assume it's clubs and societies and drinking on a Wednesday night.
Exactly. So I think it rings true to needing more information, more signposting. And
we've reached the end of the part of the paper that we wanted to look at today.
Yeah.
I'm aware we're overrunning. I just wanted, because this is an incredibly important topic, and I hope that I want to get a full discussion out of this. A couple of things that I was thinking about is, overall the trends in this survey have gone up. Things seem to be improving slowly in a lot of areas.
Yeah.
But the thing that I've noticed was, I'm a bit of a lurker on LinkedIn. I was looking through a lot of comments, and we had professionals who are in the sector who have been in it for 25 years going, I've seen these same statistics for those entire 25 years I've been here. If we're talking frankly, because this is the productive discussion I want to get out of this, do we think we can really utilize this survey to exact meaningful change? Do we think that's what institutions are open to right now?
I'm not sure if they're open to it, but I think they need to be. I think the overall trend says that they are maybe slightly more open to it with the way that things have improved a little bit, even if it's just a tiny little bit. So I really hope that we're going to see some meaningful engagement from higher education institutions across this year. and the following years to work towards this 2033 goal that we have throughout the survey. And you know, I mean, that's the whole point of DSUK, right? Disabled Students UK, is that we are advocating for students at the institutional level to try and enact this change that is needed. So hopefully with this little bit more of openness, however I say that,
as open as we can.
Yeah, a little bit more openness to engage with organisations such as ourselves to look at what they can do to make the experience better. But also, I say that knowing that there are a lot of cuts across the sector and that they're having to slash services. So I feel optimistic, but I'm aware that the wider context might prevent further work being done.
I totally agree. One thing that I want to signpost from this report is that there is a great list. I think it's at the bottom of this. If you're a member of staff or you're a career student, there's a great list of cost-effective resources you can do. A lot of it is integrated in universal design. Personally, I think there's some things you could do to review your IT infrastructure, just survey students to make sure things are working, you know, like a form that would take a few minutes. The implementation afterwards might take a bit more time, but there's easy ways that, and cost-effective ways proposed in this paper to help start improving that experience. And also, like, I want to shout out, there is a accreditation scheme. So at the bottom of this paper, which is a long way down, there is a university comparison table. There is something called Access Insights members, and they have a little star next to their name on the table in this report. They have indicated their commitment to understanding current experiences and improving outcomes for disabled students. If you are listening and you're from an institution, I really encourage you to check that out. There is some information about it, I think, at the bottom of the paper, page like 122, 123.
Yes.
See if you can do that for your institution. It's incredibly important. It will give you, if you're lacking in data, it will help you get the data and the insights that you need, I think. Do you have any more info on that?
Yeah, so our Access Insights memberships, we have different tiers of memberships for institutions, and there's things like discounts if you have less than 15,000 students. It's a great thing to be part of, and it's a great way to be in direct communication with ourselves, with Disabled Students UK, and get that lived experience support and advice. So I definitely recommend checking it out. We will link in the notes, but it is accessinsights.co.uk. And again, if any disabled students are listening, which I'm sure there are plenty of you, please encourage your institutions to check that out as well, if you're able to. If you have the spoons, do not push yourself. It's not your responsibility to make your institution listen. However, if you feel that you want to do something, you can always signpost them to Access Insights, and that will hopefully help make a difference if they can get in touch.
So that's the gist of the report, Murrin. Final question. What do we think comes next now? We've spoken about what institutions can do and the climate and what students can do. Is there anything else you think that we should be considering to enact meaningful change for disabled students?
I think for me, universal design and just implementing that across the board is one of the next steps, but I'd say there are plenty of next steps, and I could have another hour's conversation with you on such. So I think to summarise, a lot of these things are low cost to implement. A lot of these things are attitude changes. A lot of these things are more support and training for staff who don't know and are not confident in dealing with these conversations as well. So there's a lot of things that institutions need to do, but a good starting point, I would say, is looking at some of the universities that are doing well and are good examples in this report, definitely. So, yeah.
I'm going to add a couple quick bits onto the end there. I think that's fantastic. And I'm so glad we got to sit down and have this, albeit very chaotic, at points, very slightly rushed conversation with you. It's better than reading statistics in a more boring way. But the two things I wanted to raise off the back of what I've learned from this podcast: check in with your international students if you're an international student or you have any friends who don't know if they meet the threshold for being disabled, especially under the Equality Act. Get them to have a look, get them to chat to their institution. I've had guests on the show before who didn't know what the definition was in the UK. It was Louisa's episode. She was wonderful. but she went without support for years because even though she was struggling, she, according to her culture, didn't think she met the definition of disability. And also check on your staff. There is a running joke throughout academia, which has some truth to it, I'm going to be honest. There is a higher proportion of neurodivergent members of staff than probably statistics come to expect.
Yeah.
Which is a natural, to be fair, is like a natural thing from, oh, here's this really cool thing, I'm going to focus on it for the rest of time. Like, it's very neurodivergent coded. You know, I can do all these tasks in like such a short period, and the time pressure's great. It's like, oh my God. But genuinely, like, we don't have as much insight on disabled staff.
Yeah.
Especially when we're assuming a good chunk are undiagnosed, same with students. If you're listening from an institution and you're struggling with staff, especially because they're overloaded, check in with them. There might be something there as well where you can do something for the staff to help the students and help the institution. And finally, compassion is free. Empathy is free. Please lead with those. If you're a student or staff or anyone, I think it's so easy to get angry at these kinds of reports.
Yeah.
But this is a systematic problem. And be angry at the system. Don't get angry at the people. I think that's what I want to leave people with, because I have been through academic complaints where the system has been horrible and the people have been lovely. And I understand that it's easy to get angry sometimes, especially when some of the statistics we discussed today are pretty bleak. But please fight the system, not the people. Lead with empathy, lead with compassion. I think that's what I want to leave us on today. Murrin, thank you so much. I said that's the last thing, but the episode that's currently on Patreon, you know the person a little bit.
Yes.
So do you want to do a quick intro?
Yeah, I just wanted to say you're spot on with what you've said there, and I 100% am in agreement. And yes, my lovely partner, Lewis, is on the Patreon episode this week, which will be released to general next week, but I believe that it deserves payment to be listened to early. So that's just a little plug from me.
Thank you. £1 a month to join the Patreon. I was going, originally when I started the Patreon, it was going to be, oh, you know, if you can, that would be great. Just pop a little bit in and I'll maybe try and get some early release episodes. I am now currently inundated with recordings. There's going to be some early releases for a while, at least for probably the next month. So if you want to check that out, there'll be a link in the description of the episode. We'll be back with our regularly scheduled programming next week. But until then, thank you so much to Disabled Students UK sponsoring this episode, to the Snowdon Trust for funding the annual Disabled Student Survey 2025, and to Murrin for coming on this wonderful little adventure with me. Thank you, mate.
Yes, and thank you so much for having me. It's been brilliant.
Oh, always a pleasure. Always a pleasure. Cheers.
Thank you.